how to grow immersion cooling, how to grow an immersion cooling business within the data center and high performance computing environment. So your company specializes in immersion cooling, things getting dipped in liquid, which 10 years ago would have seemed crazy, right? I remember I used to go in data center tours and you're forbidden from having a cup of coffee or even a sealed bottle of water anywhere near the data halls. But you're looking to grow an immersion cooling business within the data center and high performance computing HPC environments. That's a great question, and it's certainly really, really top of mind as the explosion of demand for all things related to artificial intelligence and high performance computing continues to grow. There is an enormous demand for figuring out the cooling issues and figuring out the sustainability issues. And there's a lot of companies all over the world that are working on super fascinating solutions to this. Obviously, immersion cooling is one of the dominant solutions to addressing many of these needs. So in order to do this the right way, you first need to figure out your product and service capabilities. In other words, when I look at your website, does this accurately reflect what you're going to market and sell and deliver today? Or does that need to reflect more of what you're talking about in the conversations with your sales team and your leadership, what's on your decks that you're using, what's talked about in these conversations, what's on your proposals? If it's not currently reflected on your website pages that a complete stranger could learn more about your immersion cooling business, I'd encourage you to stop the presses and make it a priority to keep that current. Why is it so important for your website to be so current? Because we now live in a world where most of the journey is happening without you in the room, without your team in the room. Gartner found that 83% of a typical journey, including immersion cooling, now happens before vendor contact, before sales contact. That means that your best prospects, your best clients are 83% of the way through their decision-making before they're open to having a meeting with someone from your company. And this is a big difference from as recently as 10 years ago when that number hovered at 56%. So it used to be around 10 years ago that prospects and clients would spend time with your sales team starting about halfway through their research and decision-making process. Now, nearly all of the decision-making process is over before you're in the room. So your content needs to do a lot of the heavy lifting that used to be done in one-on-one face-to-face conversations. Your content needs to show up. This changes the very definition of what we mean by branding and growing a business with immersion cooling in and around data centers and HPC. What do we mean by branding? Well, it used to be that branding was something that lived within the domain of your creative director. And they talked about your hexadecimal codes, your brand colors, your logos, your fonts. Now your brand is really anything and everything that people are saying about you when you're not in the room, that the marketplace is saying about your business, about your company, about your team when you're not in the room. And given that you're really not in the room for much of the buyer's journey anymore, you're excluded from the first 83% of the buyer's journey before you're able to get invited in and get a seat at the table, even if you do everything perfectly. Your content, your educational resources, your events are your best chance to earn a virtual seat at the table in the awareness and the consideration stages of the journey. In a typical journey for something like immersion cooling, there could be as many as 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. That means you could have an amazing display at a conference where you're demoing your immersion cooling capabilities right on the expo floor. And you could have great rapport with a prospect. And that still is only one of the 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. So if you're thinking that your sales team will stay in touch and they'll see you at next year's event and everything, I don't know that that's going to necessarily work out for you. If your salesperson is going to stay in touch, I would recommend that your salesperson show up as a teacher, as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, as a subject matter expert, and a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything having to do with immersion cooling. And if your account executives, or if your sales development reps don't have anywhere near the knowledge to pull off being a thought leader, I would encourage you to position those team members to show up as tour guides, as concierges. that are able to point your best prospects and clients in the direction of your most knowledgeable internal subject matter experts that your best prospects and clients want access to in some way, shape, or form. And if it's not practical for hundreds or thousands of prospects to have one-on-one access to the be-all end-all expert or experts on your team within immersion cooling, there's a couple of approaches to this. One is a train the trainer kind of approach, where your internal experts train your account managers and account executives and sales developers and marketers and product and everyone else that's client facing to extract parts of their knowledge over time into their knowledge base by internal training webinars, professional development kind of webinars. And this can be codified, formalized into a training curriculum, virtual lunch and learns or something like that. You could check to make sure that people are really absorbing it by having a knowledge and certification program internally. In addition to training your internal team members to keep leveling up on their knowledge on anything and everything having to do with immersion cooling, your marketers, your sales enablers can bring your subject matter experts into the fold in an education and trust building context. So let's say, for example, you want to grow your immersion cooling business and you recognize that it's incredibly important for you to have relationships with CTOs and facilities directors of colocation data centers or edge data centers or whatever, enterprise data centers, whatever you're looking to do this with. So you go and you do their buyer persona research and you figure out what their biggest goals, what their biggest challenges are at the intersection of their job role, their company's goals, their company's challenges, and what you do with immersion cooling. That customer insight research gets baked into a content calendar. It gets baked into an events calendar. And all of a sudden now you have 12 topics to cover in your monthly webinar series on Immersion Cooling Academy, Immersion Cooling University. And sure, there are huge companies in the space that are knocking it out of the park doing some things like this, but I can assure you, you don't necessarily need to have the resources anywhere near a company like Schneider or Vertiv or someone like that to be able to pull off being an expert on things related to data center sustainability or AI or anything that you want to tackle that's adjacent to immersion cooling. So you can look at some of the bigger incumbents in your space that are doing amazing jobs on creating thought leadership and events about sustainability and power grid capacity and cooling and everything like that. But I can assure you there are companies with fewer than 10 employees that are figuring out ways to create these amazingly impactful podcasts and live streams and webinars that educate and build trust with their target market. So even if there's only one person on your entire team that is like at a quasi PhD level on immersion cooling, you can almost certainly get that person to commit to showing up once a month to be the guest expert on a webinar. You can likely get that person to agree to show up every other week, where on the off weeks, you're planning the next webinar. In other words, you're sending them, you're bringing a content marketer side by side with them and they're interviewing them. And the content marketer is going and building the deck, the first draft of the deck of what they're going to talk about in the webinar and running the interview. And you perhaps bring in people from your sales team so they're involved as moderators. So your prospects and clients see that your whole client-facing team is actively involved in this education initiative. And over time, you'll have successful clients and channel partners that you could bring in as additional subject matter experts on these podcast interviews and these live streams and in these webinars. And that helps to continue to demonstrate this expertise to the CTOs, to the facilities directors, whoever else you're looking to build these relationships with when it comes to demonstrating your expertise about anything and everything having to do with immersion cooling in AI and data center and high performance computing environments. And this alone, getting the right people to spend more time with your team in a context where they see your team as experts and not just another vendors, will do wonders as a branding and an indoctrination tool. Will do wonders at helping your team to be able to frame the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different competitive options that are in front of them. Will do wonders to make sure that you cover as many of those 28 touch points as possible, to monopolize the coverage, to create so much amazing immersive experiences. Bad pun, right? Immersive experiences, immersive cooling, right? To create these immersive events and educational events where you're spending so much time with your best prospects that there's no reason for them to look elsewhere for this education, because you've done such a great job throughout the full buyer's journey. So you're not only guaranteeing that you're on the short list, in some cases you can do this so well that your team is effectively knocked out the competitive alternatives on the short list by the time they get to the decision stage and they're ready for a sales conversation. They're ready for proof of concept, demo, whatever in the buyer's journey makes the most sense when you're confident that they're at the 83% point or past the 83% point and finally ready to learn more about your company's unique approach to delivering immersion cooling rather than just the broad-based problems, the broad-based goals, the broad-based challenges that you've identified in doing the customer insight research. But at the end of the day, if you're serious about growing your immersion cooling business in and around the data center industry, in and around high-performance computing environments, focus on what they care about, what's top of mind for them, meet them where they are. That will not only ensure that you are leading the conversation about what the priorities should be, but helps to educate and build trust at scale and leans into the way that modern humans are navigating the buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing. And when you do this well, many times you will completely leave in the dust and make irrelevant some of the other competitive alternatives that may have seemed like a big barrier when you first got started, but all of a sudden now, because multiple stakeholders from their decision committee have spent several hours with your company learning about all of the issues that they should be thinking about at the intersection of their business and immersion cooling, all of a sudden now it's a complete game changer for growing your immersion cooling business.